Good evening, everyone. My name is Phil. I am the pastor of the Sacred Grace TNL. I almost said the pastor of the Sacred Grace Inglewood, and that would have been embarrassing because you all would have known I'm lying. We are the church that meets here on Tuesday nights, but I'm excited to be with you tonight. I love teaching here at Inglewood, so thank you for the opportunity. Y'all are about to be 3. That is crazy to me. That blows my mind. I still remember, I will remember for the rest of my life, Jared and I sitting in a boardroom with the board of TNL and voting to basically out all of ourselves and hire Nathan and create a new board and a new organization. And that feels like it was 2 months ago. So I am very grateful that you all are here. This has become, we were praying before the service and I was reflecting on how vibrant of a community this has become in 3 years where there was none before. So I'm a very proud uncle of all of you, and I'm grateful to be here tonight. I still haven't gotten an invite to the party next week, so TBD, maybe write that down. My email is phil@tnl.org. I office right next to you if you can't remember my email. Also, it's raining right now, which is amazing. Rain is probably my favorite thing that falls out of the sky, and I celebrate it each and every time, and I had no idea that it was going to happen. So tonight's going to be a good night. We are in the thick of our Lent series, studying Jesus' Sermon on the Plain in Luke 6, which Nathan just read in its entirety. I've really enjoyed this series so far, and I hope you have too. Tonight, we're looking at yet another example of how God's way of living is radical and ridiculous and world-changing. We're gonna see just how far we're supposed to reflect this lavish love and grace of God to the world around us. God loves us even when we're at our darkest, and we're called to reflect that same love to the world, even the parts of the world that hate us. First, to begin tonight, I need to give you some background info. It might not be clear initially how this directly connects, but just hang with me. It will be important at some point if I do my job right. So to truly appreciate Jesus' words in context, we need to understand the factions within first century Judaism. There are 4 primary factions or philosophies or groups that people are a part of in first century Judaism. You can think of these as sort of like political parties. First are the Pharisees. They're the conservative, kind of fundamentalist people who like to stick to the law and believe all of the Old Testament. Then you have the Sadducees, who are the complete opposite of the Pharisees. They are very liberal. They're mostly the high priesthood and the aristocracy of Israel. They only believe in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Then you have the Essenes, who are kind of just crazy hippies who reject all of society and live out in nature by themselves and don't shower and things like that. And then we have the group that is going to be important for tonight, our focus, called the Zealots. They formed in around 6 AD to protest Roman taxation and Roman rule. This group was essentially the violent, extreme wing of the Pharisees, the conservative group. They agreed with everything the Pharisees stood for and believed in, but they also believed that it was their duty to violently oppose and overthrow Rome and to free Israel again. They believed that so much and so ardently that they advocated not just killing Romans, but also killing any Jews who collaborated with them, and also all of the Sadducees. So a lot of people. The Zealots' violence eventually leads to the siege and destruction of Jerusalem, including the temple, by Rome in 70 AD, 40 years or so after Jesus dies. So the Zealots were basically a domestic terrorist group that was active throughout Jesus' life, and they pushed for a violent overthrow of the Roman Empire. These were people that today would be blowing up abortion clinics. These are the same type of people that would do things like the Oklahoma City bombing, just to give you some examples. That's the Zealots. Okay, so take that info that I just told you and just hold on to it for a minute, file it away. It'll be important in a few minutes, but for now, just keep that in the back of your mind. Tonight, we're forking? No. That was close. That is my nightmare, by the way, is accidentally dropping the F-bomb. I've done it. I do it in my dreams, but I do it, and I don't notice that I do it, but usually my wife is sitting like right where Nathan is, and her face just goes like this, and I just keep going like nothing's wrong. And that probably is how it would end up being. No one would bat an eye. But if I say forking, that's completely different. Anyway, tonight we're focusing on a very famous portion of this very famous sermon of Jesus. That's all about loving our enemies. And so I'm going to trace through this little bit of it, bit by bit, pausing to talk about important things along the way, okay? Great. So come along with me as we delve into this incredibly beautiful and inspiring and world-changing and impossibly challenging words of Jesus. Our focus tonight is Luke 6, verses 27 through 36. And that sounds like this, starting at verse 27. To you who are ready for the truth, I say this: love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the energies of prayer for that person. If someone slaps you in the face, stand there and take it. If someone grabs your shirt, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. If someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit-for-tat stuff. Live generously. This sounds really nice, right? I think it does anyway. But it's also easy for me to think, those are beautiful, if not idealistic words, Jesus. But Jesus' audience would immediately realize that he is undoing millennia of understanding of what justice is. See, up to this point, a just response to someone doing wrong to you was captured in the idea of lex talionis, or eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, which shows up in the Old Testament in some of the first books. This principle states that one can only respond to being harmed in kind. So, if someone takes one of your sheep, you can retaliate by taking one of theirs, but not more than that. It sounds kind of barbaric to us today, like if someone does something to you, you get to do it back to them. But this is actually an incredibly progressive idea at the time that it showed up some 2,000 years before Jesus. Lex talionis actually helped prevent escalation when people disagreed or wronged each other. Because we know the natural human tendency is to escalate our retaliation when someone does something wrong to us. So someone steals one of your sheep. I don't know why sheep is the example that I came up with, but just roll with it. Someone steals one of your sheep, so you steal 4 back, right? Because you don't want them to do it again, so you try and teach them a lesson. Problem is, then they steal 10 of your sheep. So then to retaliate, you steal their entire flock and you burn down their house, right? It's just the normal, natural thing to do. There's this constant cycle of escalation and retaliation until someone is completely eliminated. Lex talionis says you can retaliate, but only to the same degree that you've been wronged. It kept the world moving and it helped prevent escalation. Jesus is now saying that's not enough. It's not enough to retaliate in kind to our enemies. It's not enough to just not retaliate against our enemies. It's not even enough to just not hate people who hate you. That's far too passive. Now Jesus is saying you need to do good to those who hate you. Go out of your way to respond with grace and generosity to people who hate and hurt you. I don't know about you, but I imagine a bunch of first century Jewish people hearing this and being very uncomfortable. This first century Roman oppressed audience has to be squirming in their chairs. How uncomfortable are you hearing this? If you're not uncomfortable, you might not actually be listening to what Jesus is saying. I was confronted this week that I often think I'm doing the right thing when I don't hate people who wrong me or don't hate people who hate me, although there's not very many. There might be more after tonight. I try really hard to not be resentful and to not be bitter, and I pat myself on the back for that. I think that I'm doing a great job. But I don't then go out of my way to do good to people who hurt me or people who I love. I cut them out of my life, or I at least hold them at arm's length so that they can't do it again. That's not love. Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the energies of prayer for that person. If someone slaps you in the face, stand there and take it. If someone grabs your shirt, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. If someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. That's crazy. And to drive this point home even further, I'm going to cheat here. For this series, we're supposed to stay in Luke, but I just couldn't resist doing this. Sorry, Jared, Nathan. Jesus adds another sentence in Matthew's version of this same sermon. And Jesus says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. That word there for mile is million, which looks a lot like million. It's where we get our word million for. It actually means 1,000, which is very confusing. But the reason why I bring it up is that it's a Latin word. It's a Latin word that shows up in the middle of a Greek sentence. That means 1,000 paces, which is roughly what a Roman mile was. There's a Greek word for 1,000 paces, but it's not used here. The Latin word is used intentionally because Jesus is referring to this practice in which Roman soldiers or officials could force anyone to carry their luggage or their armor or anything really that they didn't want to carry up to 1,000 paces, which again is what they considered a mile. For some reason, they thought that a pace was 5 feet, which is a really big pace. And people were shorter back then, so I'm not sure what they were thinking, but it's fine. So a Roman soldier or official could force you to carry anywhere up to 40 pounds of unwieldy luggage or armor or anything that they didn't want to. You're potentially carrying this in the hot sun in the opposite direction that you're trying to go. And there's no guarantee that this overlord and oppressor, when they're done with you, that another one isn't going to show up right when you're done and say, hey, guess what? I need you to carry my stuff another 1,000 paces in any direction that I deem feasible or that I want to go to. It was a humiliating practice meant to constantly remind the people that they were under Roman rule and under Roman authority. And Jesus says, if one of these people force you to do this, force you to go 1,000 paces, go 2,000. Double it. Without them even asking you, just go do it. This isn't just a good illustration for his audience. This is real life. This is a real situation that they find themselves in with a real enemy who is really oppressing them. And Jesus is saying the way to follow God is to serve your Roman oppressors in love. That's a dangerous thing for him to say in general to a group of Jewish people in the first century. But it's also it's ridiculous. If you keep Jesus' primary audience in mind for this sermon, it makes it even more radical. Right before this sermon starts in Luke chapter 6, we're told that Jesus picks out his 12 disciples. And this sermon, though given in the midst of a very large crowd, is spoken primarily to his 12 best friends that he has just gathered together. And who are they? Well, let's read in Luke chapter 6, verse 12. It says, Simon, who Jesus named Peter, because Jesus just changed people's names sometimes, don't worry about it. His brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, yes. Bartholomew, who sometimes is called Nathaniel, not Nathan, sorry. Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot. Wait, what? Simon the what? Remember all that stuff we talked about over here about zealots? That's right. At least one of Jesus' disciples is a member of the violent extremist zealots that want to kill all Romans and any Jews that collaborate with them. So Jesus is putting his life in danger just saying this to this guy. Jesus is saying the way to follow God is by loving your Roman enemies, which obviously means not killing them. Many of his disciples, but maybe especially Simon the Zealot, were following Jesus in hopes that he was the Messiah who was going to eventually overthrow Rome and restore Israel. So can you imagine how confused and angry they would be in hearing this? I'm not sure that I can. And almost as if Jesus is anticipating Simon and others' anger and rejection of his ideas, he continues on. He says, here's a simple rule of thumb for behavior. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you, then grab the initiative and do it for them. If you only love the lovable, do you expect a pat on the back? Run-of-the-mill sinners do that. If you only help those who help you, do you expect a medal? Garden variety sinners do that. Jesus is mean sometimes. If you only give for what you hope to get out of it, do you think that's charity? The stingiest of pawnbrokers does that. I tell you, love your enemies. Help and give without expecting a return. You'll never, I promise, regret it. Live out this God-created identity the way the Father lives towards us, generously and graciously, even when we're at our worst. Our Father is kind, you be kind. So it's not good enough to only love people who love you back. Instead, we're called to love at no benefit to ourselves. The word for love that is used there is agape, which shows up all over the Bible. It's the kind of love that God has towards us, selfless love that actively works for the best of the object of love. God loves us even when we're at our worst. God works for the best for us, generously showers us with grace even while we're still his enemies. That's the kind of love that we're supposed to have for others, especially our enemies. So Jesus is saying, Simon, treat Romans the way that God treats you. Treat these people who hate you and treat you poorly and oppress you the way that God treats you. Treat others the way that you want to be treated, and not just others, but those who hate you. Treat them the way you want to be treated, the way that God treats you. That's insane. And I worry that we've heard this idea so much in church that we've become inoculated to it. Jesus is saying, go out of your way to work for the best of people that hate you. That sounds like a terrible policy, especially if your country's existence depends on whether these people decide to just eradicate all of you or not. It's so counterintuitive, it's so countercultural, it's so impossibly lofty, and it's so like God. This is the love God has for us, and this is the love and the extent of that love that we are meant to reflect to the rest of the world. Again, it's not enough to just not hate others. That's passivity. We have to push into active generosity. We have to actively do good and seek the best for others, especially those who hate us. And so I actually didn't know that question was going to show up before I got up here, but I think the application for this is pretty bluntly obvious. Who do you hate? Or who hates you? Because I assume almost all of you, maybe all of you, are citizens of this country that are free. And even if you're not a citizen, you are in a country where you are far more free than most of the world. We don't have a Rome ruling over us every day in our lives. So for me, I have trouble answering these kinds of questions of who do I hate or who hates me, beyond really abstract ideas like government officials that I will probably never meet, or ISIS, or white supremacists, or any kind of supremacists for that matter, predators or murderers. These abstract ideas of people that everyone can get behind saying are evil. But who in my everyday life falls into this category? I have a really hard time answering that, which I think might mean that I'm living too isolated or too insulated a life. But I think maybe that's for another talk. Additionally, I think we have a hard time with the word hate these days. It feels really extreme, probably rightly so. So maybe better questions are, who do you oppose, or who opposes you? A family member, an in-law, coworkers, a neighbor, a former friend who betrayed you. Who do you oppose? Who opposes you? How could you take the initiative to do good for them? That's the question that Jesus is posing. Or think about it as a community. Who opposes the Sacred Grace Inglewood? How could you as a community take the initiative to do good for them? God's love is radical and ridiculous and nonsensical and beautiful and world-changing and incredibly challenging. And we've been entrusted with reflecting that love to the rest of the world around us, not just the people that love us or that we like or are agreeable, but the people we don't like, the people we disagree with, the people who we oppose or even hate. This is really famous quotes of Jesus that we're talking about, but it's a really hard truth to put into practice, even 2,000 years later. We want, or at least I'll speak for myself, I want to stop at the part that's about God loving me and not continue to see what my responsibility is in that. But can you imagine how different our world, or even just our country, would be if this is how we lived? If the rich worked for the best for the poor. If Democrats worked for the best for Republicans and vice versa. If white supremacists worked for the best of Black Lives Matter. It sounds ridiculous to even say out loud. Or if even just those who claim to follow Jesus, just us, actively worked for the best of people who oppose us. It would turn the world upside down. I'm not sure our society wouldn't fall apart if that's what happened. And I think that might be a good thing. Or at least if that's why it falls apart, it would be a good thing. I think there's a lot of opportunity for creatively reflecting God's love here. But it's up to you to decide how you will respond to these words of Jesus. It's a huge invitation for us to be an opportunity to be part of bringing heaven to earth by choosing to do maybe the most difficult thing, which is love your enemies. Will you pray with me? God, this is a really difficult truth. It sounds beautiful and it's something that I want, and yet I don't know how to put it into practice relatively easily, and maybe that's the point. I don't know how to put it into practice at all. God, I pray that you would inspire each one of us to have vision for who we oppose or who opposes us, and that we would think creatively about how we can reflect your love to them, as difficult as that may be, as little as we may want to do that. God, I pray that you would turn our hearts towards you and help us reflect your love in the world by loving our enemies. God, thank you for such a countercultural idea that is still changing the world thousands of years later. We love you, God. Amen.